My name is Olexander Pysaryuk. I live in Canada, in Toronto. Thank you to Elena for inviting me to Utic. My company's name is Achievers. So Kirill asked if you were aware of a Ukrainian company. I don't think you know Achievers company, but I will name a couple of competitors. If you know competitors, please raise your hands. Competitors are Salesforce, Global Force, via online, and Russian company Preniki. So this is the advertising of the competitors.
So Achievers develops web applications, cloud applications, and maybe I have the longest name for my presentation, specifics of localization for cloud web applications and difficulties when localizing the product from scratch. From scratch sounds interesting. When whatever company, whatever startup or young company develops a product, sooner or later they are to localize it because of strategic development or some tactical response to some demand. In our case, localization started as a tactical level response to demand from a large customer to have our platform localized into 15 languages. The company quickly hired some localization manager and assigned him with the task of localizing the product from scratch. Where does the localization start for any web application, any software, when we do it from scratch? From the customer's perspective and from the translation company perspective. From the customer's perspective, of course, it all starts with preparations, with internationalization, with technical tasks. From the translation company's perspective, it doesn't immediately start with translation, of course. Instead, it starts with a desire to be engaged at earlier stages in product development, product design. It's very important for translators, translation companies to know what's going on at every stage of product development, starting from software development to design and visual design and marketing. Some background on our company. Our headquarters have been located in Toronto. We also have offices in San Francisco, Boston, and since recently in London, UK. We are expanding into European markets, so we have got an office in London. There are 250 employees working for our company, and the localization unit has one person. My poor self, but I maintain close cooperation with my colleague in charge of internationalization in software development department, and if you can see it, this TV set says product there. I am tightly integrated into product managers group. They are product managers and there are about 10 people in that group, designers and product managers, each of them being in charge of his or her own feature within the product, and I am in charge of localization for all those features. That's how our application looks. First of all, what sort of application are we talking about? It's called Employee Success Platform. It's a marketing speak. It doesn't say anything. Basically, it's corporate social motivation network. I will tell you later what do we mean as social motivation, what does it mean. And before Konstantin asks me how many words, how many vendors, and how many languages, well, what about money? 150,000 words in the application itself. Now it has been launched in 10 languages. We have been working on 10 more, and our roadmap includes 34 languages split into 4 groups. Our roadmap has been changing based on business context, business environment, business requirements, client requirements. We have been working with one big company, one vendor, but interestingly enough, we can also recommend to our MLV which subcontractors to choose, down to individual translators. Social and motivational network. What do we mean here? There is a theory that when you work, you're motivated by your salary, your bonuses, and so on, but a great motivational tool is just some words of thanks said by your colleagues, your managers, and so on. This application provides a platform to say that sort of thanks to each other, by employees, by their managers. So when employees in a company feel that their work is appreciated, they feel better, and then all companies' employees get more involved in joint activities, and all in all it results in company's business success. So this social network motivates the general atmosphere within the company, any company. They're basically all components of the social network. User profile, news stream, several modules, meter analytics, top recognized. This is about leaders ratings or rankings. All those 150,000 words are translated using project management system, CAD system, and database system called MemoQ server. Before we started using MemoQ server, we were not using any system. At early stages for localization, we were handling French and Spanish because we started expanding into Canadian and US market, and we would just send CSV files, comma-separated value files, to our vendors. Even simpler than Excel. And vendors would send us back their translations, translated files, and some vendors would not even send us back their memory translation database exported files, because they said that these are the intellectual property of translators. After we switched to MemoQ server, everything is stored in our premises. Translation databases, terminology databases. There is a module in MemoQ server called term bases, and glossaries can be placed in MemoQ server itself. But we have purchased this add-on for MemoQ server called QTerm. We have terminology here, and it's linked to a MemoQ server, and as Fyodor showed you, like multi-term is linked to Trados Workbench, this QTerm is linked to and interacts with MemoQ server. And localization process can be split into several steps, 5 or 6 steps. It all starts with string extraction, then translation, compilation into the application or import into a web application, testing, correcting errors, and finally there is a build, and it's launched into the market and sold to users. Where do we start string extraction? Well, we start with string extraction. This is a technical task. You have to provide translators with all strings to be translated. But we didn't have this magic button called extract, where you just press it and all those files are converted into Excel or CSV. We had to develop the button design. We had to create this script or software program for this button to extract some text. And we have done a number of things. For string extraction, we first externalize those strings from code and databases to make it easier to understand. Say you're a translator, you're sent some software code and database. What are you to do with it? You have to externalize it, and the translator should only be provided with some text from that application. We have created tools to export strings from our applications and to import them back into those. We have switched to XLIF format from CSV to XLIF format for exchanging those strings with our system. The first 3 tasks were engineering tasks, internal ones, and the next 3 tasks are to help our translators. We contextualize our file resources. I'll show you later what do we mean here. We standardize file names, again to help our translators, and we standardize string IDs. That's more or less how our string IDs look. And the text from that application looks like, say, more, and the string ID is legal board view more. This is additional context where this string is taken from. It's from leaderboard module. What do we mean when we say contextualizing resource files? Well, the page has items, components called views. Of course, we could externalize strings from the whole page, and then we would send all those 150,000 words to a translator, like page number 1, page 2, page 3. But instead, it would be more logical to split this whole page into user profile view, news feed analytical module, and we link one resource file to one view. So it's convenient for us and for translators. As Fyodor said in his previous presentation, when a translator gets 900 files to be translated, that's too many. Well, unfortunately, there are disadvantages too. Yeah, we get more than 1,000 files. The translator may easily get more than 1,000 files in one project. Another drawback is this. In the user profile module and in the news feed, some strings may be repeating, say cancel button here and there, or logically different buttons. So when they're repeating strings, they look like this. In the analytics module, pulse meter, we have this button called more, and we have this button or link called more. In this context, you can translate it as, say, details, or open, or drill down, or whatever, depending on what happens after this link is used. In this top recognized in the leaderboard, we see those top 10, and then we can translate this more as show all leaders, or like all leaders. So the same text, but two different contexts, and the translator sees the context from the string ID, from those unique string IDs. And the translator, when translating this string in MemoQ, is able to see the string ID. And here she says, okay, this one is from engagement pulse, and this one is from leaderboard. And then the translator can decide how to translate this string without even seeing the application itself. Context for the translator. In addition to translator seeing the string ID, he or she also sees the file name, leaderboard, and here she also sees desktop or mobile in the file name, and then they make a respective translation decision. If it says mobile, then this is a string from a mobile string. Then the translator would maybe decide, I'll try and make it as short as possible because it should be rendered on, say, mobile phone. Then, after learning all those strings, the translator starts translating. For the customer, for me, for example, the key difficulties in translation are about providing sufficient amount of reference material for the translator to proofread. By the way, we pay the translators for their time spent on proofreading, but we also saw situations when translators would not like to read those reference materials. They wanted to translate, they didn't want to read those materials. Unfortunately, well, that's not what I said in my notes, but, sorry, interpreters, but I have some experience of teaching TOEFL, and I had a student who said, Alexander, sorry, I have not come here to remember all those dialogues from the top of my head and so on. I have to read those texts, but why have you come here then? I have come here to study English. And in a similar way, translators would say, we just want to translate. We provide translators with terms, with glossaries, with style guides. We enable them to ask questions, and questions are answered in the course of translation. We have this query management system, a platform which translators can use to ask their questions for the client. From the translator's perspective, in addition to reading the reference material, another difficult thing is internationalization. It looks like this. Internationalization lessons. All software developers have to go through internationalization training sessions before they are hired. And translators should do the same. Maybe translators are not happy about it. And I'm not going to go into much detail on the content of those internationalization training sessions. But here, translators study the details of PHP-MTL library, PHP-Intel library in PHP. It includes, for example, a module called message formatting, which is in charge of string format. Strings may contain parameters, for example, ordinal numbers, or, for example, they may contain singular or plural parameter for nouns. For example, there is a string with ordinal numbers. You already saw that leader rankings, and the string there looks more or less like this. Ordinal parameter, and the word is place. How it looks in the application. 50th position or place. In English, 50 plus stage suffix plus place. In German, it says 50 dot. That's how it's formatted in German for ordinal numbers. The format of those ordinal numbers should not be translated by translators. Translators should only translate this word, place or position. The system itself, PHP Intel library, supports number formatting in the system depending on those parameters. Why should translators go through those internationalization training sessions? Because they have to understand what they are to translate. Say, if you see this phrase, ordinal place, you immediately understand that this is an ordinal number, and depending on the parameter, I will translate this word place in some way or another. So you, as a translator, receive some additional context. So translators undergo those internationalization trainings to go into that context, to drill down into that context. All reference materials for translators are placed on our box.com. This is a cloud service for shared teamwork data. For example, there is documentation on using QTerm, our terminology database. Another resource which we use to place reference materials for translators is InVision. InVision is a tool mostly used by designers to create application prototypes. Designers create prototypes for mobile applications. I, in turn, provide translators with access to InVision projects, and translators are able at early design stages to see how the application looks before they even start localizing it. Another way of using it at early stages, another way of using sketches and prototypes is to analyze whether interface can be localized. We buy an interesting service from our vendors called analysis of localizability, so to say, the interface. For example, we have this module, connections. We develop some features, some functionality. We create new terms. Our product managers spend some time to conceptualize those features. Designers spend some time on its visual design. Why shouldn't translators spend a bit more time to better understand how that feature works, instead of simply translating the word? So at early stages, we may decide to send some assignment to the translators, like analyze the interface localizability. And translators see the module, and there is a short question like, do you have sufficient information about this module in order to translate some word? Was it easy for you to translate this word into English? What sort of difficulties you have faced? And then the answer yes or no. We represent them as graphs, as charts. Like, was it easy to transform the meaning into your language? Half of all those translators for 14 languages, like for 7 languages, people said no. Well, then it seems there is something wrong with those words, with those terms, with those names. This is good sort of feedback for our designers, for our product managers, and then they will decide. Maybe they may decide to make the product more intuitive for its users, based on the feedback they have received from the translators. So translators are our first users, we can say it this way. An important stage in product localization is testing and correcting and updating. To save time, we combine testing and correcting into one stage. Testing may be about language testing. Kirill used this triple term, language testing, but excuse me, dear or simultaneous interpreters, you know, it's like guinea pig. It has nothing to do with guinea nor pigs. Language testing, again, it has nothing to do with language or linguistics nor testing. This is simply checking the translation within the context. And we change it, we test it in two ways. First of all, parallel testing, screenshots, concurrent screenshots. On the right side, we have the English version. On the left side, we have the translation, and this is the browser window, and the tester sees it and can test his or somebody's translation against the source. The second way is crowding, just-in-place translation. We use it for testing and correcting simultaneously. It looks like this. It's not easy to see it, but there is an application window, application screen, and there is a pop-up window from this crowd-in service, and right there the translator can translate the phrase like add an achievement, and it says add an achievement in Ukrainian, додати досягнення, and if this is a wrong translation, the tester can change it right there. So we save time on testing, we save time on recording this bug into some error counting database, and we can immediately change it within the context. We don't maintain the accounting system for errors. We believe that going into the context allows the translators sufficient information to make a proper decision. Any and every error, any and every mistake is a failure for us. We don't split them into types. Any and every mistake which could be avoided is a fail. We don't punish our vendors, we don't punish our translators, we just provide them with as much information, with as many opportunities as possible at early stages to look at the context and to translate it properly from the very beginning. Mistakes. An example of mistakes that we find through testing and going into context. There is this phrase, reports to. This is my user profile. These are reports, and reports to. This is my manager, the person I report to. And reports to.
Translation to Spanish of this phrase reports to is subordinato de. The translation seems correct, subordinato de. But in Spanish, when the translator opened this page in crowd-in or just in browser and noticed that something is wrong because subordinato has some negative connotations in Spanish, so it's better to translate it in this context like gerente director, immediate manager. If we compare the translation with the original one, it is not the translation of the original. It is just a creative approach to translation, but in the context. With the additional context, it's easier to come to such a solution than just to translate it. As one of the ways to control quality, we make surveys to our direct users. We send these kind of questionnaires. Tell us about your feelings towards the language of this application, if you had noticed some mistakes or not, etc., or some open questions. We get open answers to open questions and more useful information from the users. We want them to tell us how they feel and what they think is right or wrong and why in this application. The compilation of project, such concept as compilation of project, we don't have. We have the constant development and constant localization. We publish our project once in 3 months or once in a month. Every week we release patches or hot fixes to our products. This is continuous operation, and it grows to the concept of agile localization. Agile is a very deep topic, and it deserves a separate presentation. Perhaps at the next Utic I will give such a presentation. The basic concept is Agile. Backlog, user story, sprint. As a developer of the product, you have some backlog, some set of requirements which are named user stories. This set of requirements, history, and sprint. You choose several requirements from this set. You combine it in one sprint. Sprint is a stage of development lasting 2 or 3 weeks. If you, for example, choose 5 requirements, you developed it during 2 weeks, and you close this sprint. As per next sprint, you choose next set of requirements, and you begin another sprint. So sprint after sprint is a continuous stage of localization and methodology of development of Agile. The disadvantages of Agile is that terms are often changed and the costs for translation are increasing, which might seem not justified. And a lot of translations result in turning out to be not needed. But the big advantage of development and localization is this simultaneous release of localizations, like Steamship. We can release the project in 10, 15, or 14 languages. That's everything I wanted to talk about. I wanted just one time to emphasize the difficulties we face and how we overcome it. We don't buy the standard set, translation, editing, and proofreading. All our process includes the stage, or such stage of activities. The translators are delved into the context, and they are taught peculiarities of internalizations. They are provided with a variety of different reference materials. We make an analysis of localization, and we allow the translators to translate directly in the application. We check the quality, asking the clients about the quality and not counting the errors. And everything all this is called Agile. So that's all I wanted to tell you about. Please ask any questions if you want. So let's welcome our speaker. Let's thank our speaker. I think that the localization is not a simple issue, but it has a peculiar charm because you come to the conference and you have to think as well, not just to listen. Who has questions? Alexander, thank you for your report. I have a question. You have described the process of corrections just in place, and you said that you don't register and categorize any mistakes. It looks very splendid from the point of view of speeding up the process, but I see 2 big stumbling blocks. First, this is the obstacle from the point of view of analysis of quality of work of those those contractors. The mistakes of similar type were corrected by the tester, and there was no trace of them, and you don't understand that you have some problems with this translator or contractor. This is one side of the problem. Another side of the problem is that I think that mixing procedure rules may result in problems, both ethical and business, because if someone makes a mistake, another person makes correction of these mistakes, and this person doesn't have any information about the person who made the mistake. In the classical process of proofreading, editing, and translation, ideally, there is a possibility to track some stages of this process. You actually have omitted one stage of a process, and some group of people, as a result, became dissatisfied with the quality of your translation. These actually the set of problems I wanted to outline. Two questions. Don't you think that it's very dangerous not to register mistakes of translation in terms of its quality? And the second question is, don't you see any problems in terms of efficiency and ethics due to some mixing of rules, text of editor and tester? Perhaps some batteries are discharged. Thank you, Maxim, for your question. Of course, I see some drawbacks and problems in this. We are one product company so far, and it's easier for us when the translator finds some kind of mistake and corrects it in place, and it's easier for us to determine the problem in some language, and when vendor informs us to be very careful of a big quantity of mistakes in some language. I tried different things, both in this company and in BlackBerry company where I used to work. All process and all roles you've talked about were present there. We are one product company so far. You told that you had 20 mistakes. How did you know that you had 20 mistakes if, as far as I understood, you don't register any quantity of mistakes? How can you say to the vendor that some translator had made a certain quantity of mistakes if there is no trace of it, that they were corrected by the tester? Of course, first of all, human factor, translator, vendor, or tester will inform us about it. Second, some files can be exported and compared with the previous versions of them. This is vendor's task, and he informs us about the mistakes. As far as combinations of rules is concerned, I stick to the principle of alienation. The task of a tester is only to test. The task for a translator is only to translate. And the next person has the next task. And the task of this person is to correct mistakes. One person translates, one person corrects. It takes too long, and it is too alienated for the people to work apart from each other. If we combine these problems, it takes less time and it makes better translation. It worked out for our context. I understand that it might be not correct approach, but it's simpler in our case. That's why we chose that way. Thank you for the report. I've got some questions. Andrew, Translation Bureau, Prof. I have a question. So your idea is to involve the translator in certain roles, more roles than he usually performs. So how is it when one translator was very particular about watching the video and doing all the process steps, and another translator didn't do that? One person actually studies and learns how to do it. It's easier for one translator. How can you control mistakes for 14 languages for 10 translators? There is a service Xbox where we place our materials. Each translator has his or her own account, and we see what is downloaded by which translator. We register every translations of how the translators are trained. The second point, our vendor who hires translators controls this aspect. The issue is in trust. If I watch the video and if I watch the video, I cannot check whether the translator has watched it up to the end. Before we hire translators, we divide them into those who do translators and those who do research before doing translations, so-called terminologists and translators. The terminologists are selected according to the interview. I feel if I can trust the person, if he asks question. If it doesn't ask any question, we may just talk about what isn't clear to him and why he asks so few or many questions. Did I answer your question? Did I answer your question? Yes, you did. So you have lots of translators, and you interview each of them. No, just terminologists who do research in the field of translator. We are selecting them on a personal basis. The structure is like that. Vendor recommends several people to us. I'm looking up through their resumes. We interview them both in Skype or personally. And we have 10 terminologists, and it is not difficult for me to communicate with them both by email or personally. They are in the vendor structure. Am I right? Yes. Can you hear me? Yes. So, Alexander, thank you very much for your report. A couple of questions, more tactical perhaps. You mentioned that you sometimes use screenshot check-in or sometimes use crowd-in. Why you use one or the first or the second variant? We use crowd-in for testing simultaneous corrections at the early stages of translation. We don't translate 150,000 words by crowd-in. Translators have lots of tools they use in their creative activity. QA, MemQ, and whatever. Crowd-in is used in specific cases in translating the most important modules, most responsible modules. So while testing these modules, we do it in the form of crowd-in. The first 20 pages this user sees when entering the website or social network, they are made through crowd-in. Thank you. It's clear and very logical. And the second question is about release currents, about patches. What scale does this patch have regularly? How many new words do these bring to you? Actually, I didn't measure them. A new release is a set of new features of product, perhaps 100, 150 products or text files, each weighing several hundreds of kilobytes and containing several hundreds of words. It's not that much. Perhaps they contain some tooltips, highlighted helps, but their function is to introduce several hundreds of words. Sometimes they are just back-end changes. Do you have any documentations for the product? Yes. But it's not actually traditional documentation. Our documentation is written in a not traditional way. It is written by product managers, and each of them writes as per his or her own feature. Is it localized? Yes, it is localized. So let's finish with it for today. Thank you very much, Alexander. Thank you.